Sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in the most unlikely packages. When little Lily Matthews lost her great-aunt Martha, she never expected to inherit anything more than memories and heartache. All Martha left behind was an old cabin that looked ready to fall down, and a golden retriever named Max, who had been her constant companion. Everyone in Pine Ridge told Lily the same thing. The cabin was worthless junk. The roof leaked, the porch sagged, and weeds had taken over completely. It seemed like more trouble than it was worth. But Max had different ideas about that old cabin. On their third visit, while Lily was cleaning up inside, Max started digging near the foundation. His paws hit something metal buried under years of dirt and leaves. What he found changed everything. That rusty old key opened a door that had been hidden for decades. Behind it lay the kind of secret that could make a little girl very rich or put her in serious danger. How does $200 million stay buried for so long? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Chitta. Morning after Martha's funeral, Lily Matthews sat on her family's front porch swing, watching the mist rise from the valley below Pine Ridge. At 8 years old, she understood death in the way children do, as a permanent absence that leaves echoes in empty rooms and conversations that trail off into silence. Her mother had explained that Great-Aunt Martha was now at peace, but peace seemed like a cold comfort when Lily remembered the way Martha's eyes would light up whenever she visited, how she always had fresh cookies waiting and stories that made ordinary things seem magical. Martha had been different from the other adults in Pine Ridge. While most grown-ups hurried through their days with serious faces and worried voices, Martha moved through the world with a gentle curiosity that made even grocery shopping feel like an adventure. She would point out unusual cloud formations, stop to examine interesting stones, and always seemed to know which flowers would bloom next in her wild, untamed garden behind the cabin. "Lily, honey, come inside," her mother called from the kitchen doorway. Sarah Matthews was a practical woman who worked double shifts at the Pine Ridge General Store to help make ends meet. Her husband Tom drove delivery trucks for a living, hauling goods across 3 counties when work was available. They were good people who loved their daughter deeply, but money had always been tight in the Matthews household. Inside, the kitchen smelled of coffee and the cinnamon rolls her mother made every Sunday, a tradition that had continued even through their grief. Tom sat at the small wooden table, papers spread before him, reading glasses perched on his nose, as he studied what appeared to be legal documents. "What's all that, Dad?" Lily asked, sliding into her usual chair. Tom looked up, his weathered face showing the kind of fatigue that came from years of honest work and constant worry about bills. "It's about Aunt Martha's property, sweetheart. Seems she left it to you in her will." Lily's eyes widened. She had expected maybe a few of Martha's books, or perhaps the music box that played Für Elise when you wound it up. The idea of inheriting actual property seemed impossible. "The cabin. She left me the cabin. And everything on it," Sarah said, settling into her chair with a sigh. "Including that golden retriever of hers. Max, I think his name is. But why would she leave it to me? I'm just a kid." Tom folded the papers carefully. "Martha never had children of her own, and she always said you had the kindest heart of anyone she knew. Maybe she thought you'd take good care of what meant something to her." The conversation was interrupted by a scratching sound at the front door, followed by a low, mournful whine. When Sarah opened it, Max stood on the porch, his golden coat damp with morning dew. He was a beautiful dog, well-trained and gentle, with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding. Martha had rescued him as a puppy 5 years ago, and the two had been inseparable ever since. "Oh, you poor thing," Sarah murmured, kneeling down to pet him. "You must be so confused." Max walked directly to Lily, as if he somehow understood that. She was now the most important person in his world. He sat beside her chair and placed his head on her lap, looking up at her with those soulful eyes. In that moment, Lily felt the weight of responsibility settle on her young shoulders. This dog had lost the person he loved most, just as she had. "Can we keep him, Mom? Please?" Sarah and Tom exchanged glances. They had never owned a pet, and their small house already felt crowded. But looking at the dog's obvious grief and their daughter's pleading expression, the decision made itself. "We'll figure it out," Tom said quietly. "A dog needs looking after, though. That's a big responsibility. I'll take good care of him, I promise." Later that morning, the family drove out to see Martha's cabin for the first time since the funeral. It sat on 12 acres of land, about 3 miles outside Pine Ridge proper, accessible by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense pine trees. The cabin itself was a modest structure built sometime in the 1940s, with log walls and a metal roof that had seen better decades. As they pulled into the overgrown driveway, Lily could see why everyone considered the property worthless. The front porch sagged under the weight of accumulated snow from many winters, and several of the support posts had rotted through. Ivy had climbed halfway up the walls, and what had once been Martha's flower garden had become a tangle of weeds and volunteer saplings. "Lord have mercy," Sarah whispered, taking in the extent of the neglect. "Lily, honey, I don't think there's much here worth saving." But Lily was looking at something else entirely. On the small kitchen table visible through the window, Martha's reading glasses still sat exactly where she had left them, a bookmark holding her place in a worn paperback novel. The sight made Lily's chest tight with emotion. Those glasses represented all the stories Martha would never finish, all the conversations they would never have. Max jumped out of the truck before anyone could stop him and ran straight to the cabin's front door, where he sat and waited as if expecting Martha to appear. His tail wagged hopefully for a few moments before settling into a disappointed stillness. Tom tried the front door and found it unlocked. "Martha never was one for security," he muttered, pushing it open. The hinges creaked in protest, and the door stuck part way, warped by years of weather and settling. Inside, the cabin was a time capsule of Martha's life. Her favorite rocking chair sat by the window, positioned to catch the morning light. Bookshelves lined every available wall, packed with volumes on history, astronomy, gardening, and adventure stories. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel crowded with photographs spanning decades. She was always reading something, Lily remembered aloud, running her fingers along the spine of a book about local history. She said books were like doorways to everywhere she'd never been. The cabin was small, but efficiently arranged. The main room served as both living and dining area, with a tiny kitchen tucked into one corner. A narrow hallway led to 2 bedrooms, and a bathroom that showed its age in the rust stains around the fixtures. Everything was clean but worn, maintained with the careful attention of someone who had learned to make things last. "The foundation looks solid," Tom observed, testing a floorboard with his boot. "Roof needs work, and the plumbing's probably original, but the bones are good." Sarah was examining the kitchen, opening cabinets and testing the old gas stove. She kept everything tidy. I'll give her that. Not much of value, though. Maybe some of the books could be sold. But Lily wasn't thinking about selling anything. She was remembering all the afternoons she had spent here with Martha, learning to identify bird songs and hearing stories about the old days in Pine Ridge. Martha had always spoken about the cabin, as if it held special significance, though she had never explained exactly why. Max had been exploring the rooms with increasing agitation. He kept returning to certain spots, sniffing intensely and whining softly. His behavior reminded Lily of the way he acted when he was trying to tell Martha something important. "What is it, boy?" Lily asked, kneeling down to scratch behind his ears. "What are you trying to show us?" The dog looked at her with those intelligent eyes, then trotted to the kitchen and sat down beside what appeared to be an ordinary section of wall. He pawed at the baseboard, whined once, then looked back at Lily expectantly. Tom, we should probably board this place up until we can figure out what to do with it, Sarah was saying. It's not safe to leave it sitting empty. Mum, can I keep some of Martha's things, just to remember her by? Of course, sweetheart, take whatever means something to you. As her parents continued their practical assessment of the property's condition and potential value, Lily found herself drawn to Martha's reading glasses. She picked them up carefully, surprised by how light they felt in her small hands. The bookmark was holding Martha's place in a mystery novel about halfway through. Lily made a silent promise to finish reading it for her. Outside, the afternoon sun was filtering through the pine trees, casting long shadows across the overgrown yard. The property extended far beyond what was visible from the cabin, disappearing into dense woods that Martha had always loved to explore. She had often told Lily about the wildlife that lived there, deer, rabbits, and sometimes even black bears passing through on their way to better hunting grounds. "We'll come back next weekend," Tom decided, locking the door behind them. "Give us time to think about what makes the most sense." As they loaded back into the truck, Lily noticed Max's reluctance to leave. He kept looking back at the cabin, as if he expected Martha to appear at any moment. The drive home was quiet, each family member lost in their own thoughts about what Martha's unexpected gift might mean for their future. That evening, after Max had been fed and given a place to sleep on an old blanket in the mudroom, Lily sat in her bedroom reading Martha's mystery novel. The story was about a woman who inherited an old house and discovered it held secrets from the previous owner. The parallel wasn't lost on her young mind. Through her window, she could see the lights of Pine Ridge twinkling in the valley below. It was a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business, where secrets were hard to keep and gossip traveled faster than the morning newspaper. If Martha had left her something valuable, the whole town would know about it soon enough. But as she fell asleep that night, with Max keeping watch from the mudroom below, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that Martha's gift was about more than just an old cabin and some land. There had been something in Martha's eyes during her final visit, a sense of urgency mixed with hope, as if she had been trying to communicate something important without using words. Whatever Martha had intended, Lily was determined to honor her great-aunt's memory by taking good care of both Max and the property she had inherited. She was only 8 years old, but she understood the weight of responsibility that came with being trusted with something precious to someone you loved. The rusty key sat in Lily's pocket like a secret waiting to be told. 3 days had passed since Max had dug it up from beside the cabin's foundation, and she had carried it with her everywhere, turning it over in her small fingers during quiet moments. The metal was old and worn, its original brass finish darkened by decades of weather and earth, but it was clearly crafted with care. Strange symbols were etched along its length, and the head was shaped unlike any key she had ever seen. Her parents had agreed to let her visit the cabin again on Saturday morning, provided she took Max along for protection and promised to be back by lunch. Tom had given her a small toolbox with basic supplies for cleaning up, and Sarah had packed sandwiches and a thermos of hot chocolate for what she called your adventure. The morning air was crisp and clean as Lily and Max walked up the familiar dirt road to Martha's cabin. Frost still clung to the pine needles, and their breath formed small clouds that disappeared quickly in the warming sunlight. Max seemed more energetic than he had been since Martha's death, his tail wagging as he trotted ahead to investigate interesting scents along the path. At the cabin, Lily unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The musty smell of closed spaces greeted her, mixed with the lingering traces of Martha's lavender sachets and the old wood of the furniture. Everything was exactly as they had left it. Martha's reading glasses still on the table, books still perfectly arranged on their shelves, photographs still keeping their silent watch from the mantel. Max immediately began his mysterious behavior, again going straight to the spot in the kitchen where he had been so agitated during their previous visit. He sat down beside what looked like an ordinary section of wall, whined softly, and looked at Lily with an expression that seemed to say, You're not paying attention to what's important. What is it, boy? What are you trying to tell me? She knelt down beside him and examined the area more closely. The baseboard looked normal enough, painted the same cream color as the rest of the kitchen trim. But as she ran her fingers along its length, she noticed something odd. There was a tiny gap between the board and the wall, as if it hadn't been properly secured when it was installed. The rusty key seemed to grow warmer in her pocket. Max, do you think this key goes to something here? Is that what you're trying to show me? The dog barked once, a sharp, excited sound that seemed like confirmation. Lily pulled the key from her pocket and examined it more carefully. It was definitely too large and unusually shaped to fit any normal door lock. The head was rectangular rather than round, and the teeth were more complex than those on modern keys. It reminded her of something from a movie about pirates or treasure hunters. She tried pressing against the baseboard, and to her amazement, it moved. What she had taken for a solid piece of trim was actually a cleverly concealed panel. Behind it, hidden in the wall's framework, was a keyhole that perfectly matched her mysterious key. Her heart began beating faster as she inserted the key and turned it. The mechanism moved with surprising smoothness, and she heard the distinct sound of a lock disengaging. Then, incredibly, what she had thought was a solid wall began to swing inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Oh, my goodness," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the sudden quiet of the cabin. Max pushed past her and started down the stairs, his claws clicking on the wooden steps. After a moment's hesitation, Lily followed, using her phone's flashlight to illuminate the way. The stairs were solid despite their age, and they descended much farther than she would have expected, given the cabin's modest size. At the bottom, her phone light revealed a small underground room carved directly into the rock beneath the cabin's foundation. The walls were lined with wooden shelves, and the air smelled of earth and old paper, with just a hint of Martha's familiar lavender. Someone had taken great care to keep this space dry and organized. The shelves held an amazing collection of items, and that took Lily's breath away. There were dozens of leather-bound journals, their spines labeled with dates going back more than 50 years. Maps of all sizes were carefully rolled and stored in wooden tubes. Metal filing boxes sat in neat rows, each one labeled with cryptic notations, and on a small desk in the center of the room, positioned as if someone had just been working there, was an open journal with Martha's distinctive handwriting visible on its pages. Max settled himself beside the desk chair as if this had always been his usual spot. His behavior suggested he had been in this room many times before, probably accompanying Martha during her secret sessions down here. Lily approached the desk with reverence, feeling like an explorer who had stumbled upon a lost temple. The open journal was dated just 2 weeks before Martha's death, and the visible entry was written in Martha's careful script. "If something happens to me before I can tell Lily the truth, I pray she will be clever enough to find this room. Max knows the way, and he will help her understand what I could never explain while I was alive. The key is buried where we used to plant the morning glories, right beside the foundation stones. She has always been special, that little girl. She has the heart of a guardian and the curiosity of a true seeker. I believe she can do what I never had the courage to do." Lily's hands trembled as she read the words. Martha had known this might happen. She had planned for Lily to find this room. The next page contained a rough map of the property, with various locations marked in Martha's careful hand. Some were labeled with dates, others with mysterious symbols that matched the markings. On the key, at the center of the map, a location near the cabin was marked with a large X and the notation, "The heart of it all, where grandfather's legacy waits." As Lily turned the pages of the journal, the scope of Martha's secret began to reveal itself. These weren't just random notes or family memories. These were the careful records of someone who had been guarding something precious for decades. References to the family trust and protecting what was meant for future generations appeared throughout the entries. One passage, dated 3 months earlier, made Lily's stomach flutter with excitement and fear. I walked the perimeter again today, checking the markers. Everything remains secure, but I worry about the signs of activity I've been noticing. Tire tracks where there should be none. Survey stakes that weren't there last month. I fear someone else may be closing in on the truth. If they find what lies beneath this land, it won't just be money thereafter. They'll destroy everything grandfather built, everything our family sacrificed to preserve. The weight of responsibility settled on Lily's young shoulders like a heavy blanket. Whatever Martha had been protecting, it was now her job to guard. But she was only 8 years old, and the adult world suddenly seemed much more complicated and dangerous than she had ever imagined. Max seemed to sense her growing anxiety. He left his spot by the chair and came to lean against her legs, offering his solid presence as comfort. His brown eyes looked up at her with complete trust, as if he believed she could handle whatever challenges lay ahead. "What did Martha get us into, Max?" she asked softly, running her fingers through his golden fur. "And what are we supposed to do about it?" As if in answer, the dog walked to one of the filing boxes and sat down beside it, tail wagging expectantly. The label on the box read, "Foundation Documents Keep Safe." Lily opened the box with shaking hands and found herself looking at papers. That seemed far too important for an 8-year-old to be handling. Land deeds, surveyors' reports, and legal documents dating back to the early 1900s. But most startling of all was a modern folder labeled Current Threats. Monitor carefully. Inside were photographs of people she didn't recognize, license plate numbers, and notes about unusual activity around the property. Martha hadn't just been protecting some family heirloom or sentimental keepsake. She had been conducting what looked like surveillance operations. The last item in the folder was a sealed envelope with Lily's name written across it in Martha's careful script. Inside was a letter that began, "My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, then you have found the room and begun to understand the burden I must now pass to you." As she read Martha's final message, Lily began to grasp the true magnitude of what she had inherited. This wasn't just a run-down cabin and some wooded land. This was the center of something much larger, something that people had been willing to watch and wait for, something worth protecting for generations. And now it was all up to her. Martha's personal journal felt like holding a conversation with a ghost. Over the following week, Lily made 3 secret trips to the hidden room, each time spending hours reading through the careful records her great-aunt had maintained. With each page she turned, the mystery deepened, and the weight of her inheritance grew heavier. The journal entries painted a picture of a woman living with constant vigilance. Martha had documented everything: unusual vehicles passing the cabin, strangers asking questions about the property in town, even changes in the local wildlife patterns that might indicate increased human activity in the surrounding woods. She had been far more than the eccentric old lady the town had known her to be. She had been a guardian, protecting something that others clearly wanted to find. "Max, look at this," Lily whispered, pointing to an entry dated 6 months before Martha's death. She writes about men in a white pickup truck driving slowly past the cabin 3 times in 1 week. She even has their license plate number written down. The golden retriever had become her constant companion during these underground investigations. He seemed completely at ease in the hidden room, often settling into spots that Martha had obviously arranged for him. There was a dog bed in one corner that still held the impression of his body, and a water bowl that Martha had kept filled during her visits. The most startling discovery came in a journal entry from just 1 month before Martha passed away. There, getting bolder. "Today I found surveyors' stakes driven into the ground along the eastern boundary of the property. Fresh stakes, not from any county assessment. Someone is measuring my land without permission. I pulled them up and stored them in the evidence box. But I fear this is just the beginning. The family's secret may be in more danger than I had imagined. Lily found the evidence box Martha had referenced, and inside were indeed several metal surveyor's stakes, along with photographs of where they had been placed. The precision of Martha's documentation was impressive. She had measured distances, noted GPS coordinates, and even taken soil samples from the disturbed areas. But it was the final entries in the journal that made Lily's hands shake as she read them. I can no longer ignore the signs. Someone knows about the treasure. The question is how much they know and whether they understand its true value. It's not just about money, though God knows there's enough of that to change many lives. It's about preserving what grandfather fought to protect, what our family has guarded for 3 generations. If the wrong people find it first, they'll strip the land bare and destroy everything that made it sacred. The word treasure appeared in the journal 47 times. Lily had counted. Each reference was more tantalizing than the last. Building. A picture of something substantial buried somewhere on the property. Martha wrote about the heart of grandfather's legacy and 200 million reasons to keep the secret safe. $200 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real to an 8-year-old girl. Lily tried to imagine what that much money would look like, how much space it would take up, what her family could do with such wealth. But every time she started to daydream about the possibilities, Martha's warnings brought her back to reality. This treasure, whatever it was, had already attracted dangerous attention. Max had become increasingly protective during their visits to the cabin. His training, which Lily was only beginning to understand, extended far beyond typical pet obedience. He would position himself near the windows while she read, alert to any sounds outside. When they walked around the property, he would range ahead, checking areas before allowing her to approach. His behavior reminded her of the guard dogs she had seen in movies, except Max's protection came wrapped in gentle golden fur and loving brown eyes. The most frightening entry in Martha's journal was also the most recent, dated just 5 days. Before her death, I caught them on the property today, 2 men with metal detectors working the area near the old well. Max alerted me to their presence, and I managed to observe them from the tree line for nearly an hour. They weren't casual treasure hunters or history buffs. These men knew exactly what they were looking for. One of them had maps that looked disturbingly familiar. I fear someone has been sharing information they shouldn't have access to. I've made my decision. If anything happens to me, Lily must be prepared to protect what I cannot. She's young, but she has the heart for it. Max will help her understand. That final line haunted Lily. Martha had somehow known her death was coming, and she had chosen an 8-year-old girl to carry on a responsibility that had consumed decades of her adult life. The trust implicit in that choice was both heartwarming and terrifying. After reading that entry, Lily spent an hour just sitting in Martha's chair, trying to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. Max seemed to sense her emotional turmoil and pressed close against her legs, offering his solid warmth as comfort. "She really meant for this to be mine, didn't she, boy?" she asked softly. "All of it. The secret, the treasure, the danger." Max looked up at her with those intelligent eyes and whined softly, a sound that somehow conveyed both sympathy and encouragement. The practical side of her 8-year-old mind began asserting itself. If Martha had been right about the treasure, if there really were $200 million hidden somewhere on the property, then Lily's parents would never have to worry about money again. Her father wouldn't need to drive trucks across 3 states to make ends meet. Her mother wouldn't have to work double shifts at the general store. They could fix their leaky roof, replace the old car that barely started in winter, maybe even take a real vacation for the first time in Lily's memory. But Martha's warnings echoed in her mind. This wasn't just about finding buried treasure. There were people watching, waiting, planning to take what didn't belong to them. People who had metal detectors and maps, and enough determination to trespass on private property in broad daylight. As she prepared to leave the hidden room that day, Lily made a decision that felt both mature and terrifying. She was going to keep Martha's secret, at least until she could understand more about what she was dealing with. Her parents were good people, but they were also practical adults who would probably insist on involving lawyers and authorities if they knew the truth. Martha's careful warning suggested that might be exactly the wrong approach. "It's just you and me, for now, Max," she said, looking around the room one final time before switching off her phone's flashlight. "We need to figure out what Martha wanted us to do, and we need to do it before those men with the metal detectors figure out we know they're coming." As they climbed the stairs back to the cabin's main floor, Lily felt the weight of Martha's journal in her backpack. She had decided to take it home, along with some of the most important documents from the filing boxes. If she was going to protect Martha's legacy, she needed to understand it completely. But first, she needed to learn how to be the kind of guardian Martha had been. That meant developing skills and knowledge she had never needed as a regular 8-year-old girl. It meant learning to think like someone much older and more experienced than her years should have allowed. It meant growing up faster than any child should have to. The original land deed was written in the formal language of 1923. Its elaborate script faded, but still legible after nearly a century. Lily had found it in a special folder marked Foundation Documents during her 4th visit to Martha's hidden room, and the discovery had changed everything she thought she knew about the property. According to the deed, Martha's cabin sat on land originally purchased by her great-grandfather Samuel Matthews, not as a simple residential lot, but as part of something called the Matthews Family Preservation Trust. The document referenced mineral rights, timber rights, and something mysteriously described as subterranean historical preservation areas. "Max, listen to this part," Lily read aloud, her finger following the ornate lettering. "The grantee agrees to maintain said property in perpetuity for the preservation of materials and artifacts of significant historical value, as detailed in the accompanying documentation held in trust by the First National Bank of Pine Ridge." The dog lifted his head from where he had been resting beside Martha's desk. His ears perked up at the formal tone in Lily's voice, as if he recognized the importance of what she was reading. But it was the survey map attached to the original deed that made Lily's breath catch in her throat. The property boundaries extended far beyond what she had realized, encompassing nearly 80 acres of dense forest land. More importantly, the map showed structures that no longer existed above ground. A series of buildings marked as storage facilities and preservation chambers scattered throughout the woods. Martha had been maintaining more than just a cabin and some garden space. She had been the caretaker of what appeared to be an entire historical preservation site, most of which was now hidden beneath decades of forest growth. The real revelation came when Lily found Martha's modern maps overlaid on copies of the original survey. Using different colored pens, Martha had marked locations where she had found evidence of the old underground structures. X's marked spots where ground-penetrating radar had detected voids beneath the surface. Circles indicated areas where metal detectors had found significant readings. Lines connected various points in a pattern that looked disturbingly like a treasure map. At the center of it all, marked with a red star and the notation "Primary Cache, Grandfather's Core Legacy," was a location about a quarter-mile deeper into the woods than Lily had ever explored. "She knew exactly where it was," Lily whispered, tracing the path Martha had marked from the cabin to the treasure site. All these years, she knew exactly where to find it. Max had grown restless during her reading, pacing between the desk and the stairs that led back to the cabin. His behavior reminded Lily of the way he acted when he sensed something wrong outside. She was about to ask him what was bothering him when she heard it too, the distant sound of a vehicle approaching on the dirt road. Moving quickly but quietly, they climbed the stairs and emerged into the cabin's kitchen. Lily carefully secured the hidden door and peered through the window toward the driveway. A dark blue pickup truck she didn't recognize had pulled up beside the cabin. and two men in work clothes were getting out. One of them was carrying what looked like surveying equipment. The other had a metal detector slung over his shoulder. Lily's heart began racing as she remembered Martha's journal entries about trespassers with metal detectors. These had to be the same men, or others working with them. They moved across the property with the confidence of people who had been there before, heading straight for the area where Martha had found the surveyor's stakes. Max pressed close against her legs, his body tense and alert. A low growl rumbled in his chest, but he remained perfectly still, as if he had been trained for exactly this situation. "Steady, boy," Lily whispered, trying to project more calm than she felt. "We need to see what they're doing." From the kitchen window, she watched the men set up their equipment near the tree line. They weren't being particularly secretive about their activities, which suggested they either didn't care about being discovered or believed the property was unmonitored. The man with the metal detector began working in a systematic grid pattern, while his companion took measurements and made notes on a clipboard. After about 20 minutes, they packed up their equipment and returned to their truck. But instead of leaving immediately, the driver pulled out a cell phone and appeared to be reporting to someone. Lily couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see him pointing toward different areas of the property while he talked. When they finally drove away, Lily waited another 10 minutes before venturing outside to examine the area where they had been working. Max ranged ahead of her, his nose to the ground, following scent trails that were invisible to her, but obviously significant to him. The men had been thorough in covering their tracks, but they hadn't been perfect. Small depressions in the pine. Needle carpet showed where they had set down their equipment. More troubling, Lily found several small holes where they had tested the soil with some kind of probe. "They're getting closer, aren't they?" she asked Max, who was investigating one of the probe holes with intense interest. Martha was right to be worried. That evening, sitting in her bedroom with Martha's journal spread across her desk, Lily began to understand the true urgency of her situation. The people looking for Martha's treasure weren't casual opportunists or local history buffs. They were organized, patient, and equipped with professional-grade equipment. They had been studying the property for months, possibly years, waiting for the right opportunity to search it thoroughly. Martha's death had removed the primary obstacle to their plans. An 8-year-old girl who visited occasionally was hardly the same deterrent as a vigilant elderly woman who knew every inch of the property. But Martha had prepared for this possibility. Hidden among her papers, Lily found detailed instructions for something Martha called Phase 2 Protection Protocols. The document included contact information for several people Martha trusted, along with specific steps to take if surveillance indicates imminent threat to the preservation site. The list of trusted contacts was small but impressive. It included a retired FBI agent who lived 2 towns over, a geology professor at the State University who had been helping Martha with ground analysis, and most surprisingly, the current mayor of Pine Ridge, who apparently knew more about the Matthews family treasure than he had ever let on publicly. "Phase 2 means I'm supposed to start building a team," Lily said to Max, who was lying on her bedroom floor, still alert despite the late hour. "Martha never intended for me to handle this alone." The thought was both reassuring and terrifying. Involving adults would mean sharing Martha's secret, trusting people she barely knew with information that could change everything. But continuing to work alone, especially now that the treasure hunters were becoming more aggressive, seemed impossible for someone her age. As she prepared for bed that night, Lily made a decision that felt simultaneously mature and frightening. She would follow Martha's protocols. She would begin reaching out to the people Martha had trusted, starting with the mayor, who lived right in Pine Ridge and could help her understand what the treasure hunters might do next. But first, she needed to learn everything she could about what Martha had been protecting. The original land deed was just the beginning. If there really were 80 acres of hidden historical preservation sites, if there really were $200 million worth of treasure buried beneath the property, then she needed to understand. Not just where it was, but what it represented and why it was worth preserving. Max stretched out on the rug beside her bed, positioned where he could see both the door and the window. Even in sleep, he would be guarding her, just as he had guarded Martha for all those years. The weight of that loyalty, passed from the old woman to the young girl, felt like both a gift and a responsibility that would define the rest of her life. The surveyor's transit sat in its wooden case like a precious artifact from another era. Lily had discovered it during her 5th visit to Martha's hidden room, tucked away in a corner cabinet behind several boxes of old photographs. The brass instrument gleamed despite its age, its lenses clear and its mechanisms smooth from careful maintenance. A leather-bound notebook beside it contained pages of Martha's careful measurements and calculations, each entry dated and annotated with cryptic references to locations around the property. "Look at this, Max," Lily whispered, running her fingers over the instrument's polished surface. Martha was doing her own surveying. She wasn't just guessing about where the treasure might be. She was measuring everything scientifically. The sill notebook revealed the extent of Martha's methodical approach to protecting the family legacy. She had spent years mapping every significant feature of the property, from natural landmarks to the remains of structures that were no longer visible above ground. Her notes referenced elevation changes, magnetic anomalies, and soil composition variations that suggested buried objects or voids beneath the surface. One entry, dated 2 years earlier, particularly caught Lily's attention. "Triangulation complete" for Site 7. Measurements confirm grandfather's original placement calculations. Distance from cabin foundation, 1,047 feet at bearing 127 degrees. Depth indicators suggest primary cache is approximately 12 feet below current ground level. Access tunnel from Site 4 appears intact based on ground-penetrating radar results. Martha had found it. She had located the exact spot where her great-grandfather had hidden the family treasure nearly a century ago. But she had never retrieved it, choosing instead to continue guarding it in place, protecting it from those who would use it for purposes Samuel Matthews had never intended. The sound of vehicles in the driveway interrupted Lily's study of the surveyor's notes. She quickly closed the notebook and moved to peer through the small window that provided a view of the cabin's front yard. 2 pickup trucks were parked beside her family's car, and she could see her father talking with 4 men she didn't recognize. Max's behavior immediately changed. His relaxed posture disappeared, replaced by the alert tension she had learned to recognize as his warning stance. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he positioned himself between Lily and the stairs leading back. "To the cabin." "Steady, boy," she whispered, placing a calming hand on his head. "Let's see what's happening before we panic." Through the window, she could see that the conversation above was becoming heated. Her father's body language suggested frustration, while the 4 strangers maintained the confident posture of people accustomed to getting their way. One of them was pointing toward different areas of the property, while another consulted what appeared to be official-looking documents. After about 15 minutes, the men returned to their trucks and drove away, but not before one of them took several photographs of the cabin and surrounding area. Tom Matthews stood in the driveway for a long moment after they left, his expression troubled as he stared toward the woods where Martha used to walk. Lily waited another 10 minutes before carefully emerging from the hidden room. She found her father sitting at Martha's kitchen table, studying a business card and frowning deeply. "Dad, what's wrong? Who were those men?" Tom looked up, his weathered face showing the kind of concern that came from dealing with problems beyond his usual experience. "Land developers, sweetheart. They want to buy Martha's property from us. Made quite an impressive offer, actually. But it's not for sale, is it? Martha left it to me. That's what I told them. But they seemed to think we might reconsider once we understood the full potential of the land." He made air quotes around the phrase, his tone suggesting he hadn't been impressed by their sales pitch. They kept talking about mineral rights and development opportunities. Said they'd done extensive research on the property's potential value. Lily's stomach tightened. These weren't the same men she had seen earlier with the metal detectors, but they were clearly part of the same effort to gain access to the property. The treasure hunters had evolved their strategy, moving from secretive surveillance to direct legal pressure. "What kind of offer?" she asked, trying to sound like a curious child rather than someone who already knew why the property was valuable. "More money than our family has ever seen, that's for certain. They're talking about numbers that could set us up for life." Tom studied his daughter's face carefully. "But money isn't everything, and Martha trusted us with something that meant a lot to her. I'm not ready to just sell it off to the highest bidder." Relief flooded through Lily, followed immediately by guilt about the secret she was keeping from her father. He was making the right decision for reasons he didn't even understand, protecting something precious without knowing its true value. Did they say they'd be back? Oh, they'll be back. Men like that don't take no for an answer easily. They left, and their card, and said they'd give us a week to think it over before making what they called a final offer. Tom's expression grew more serious. "Lily, has anyone else been around the cabin when you visited? Anyone asking questions or seeming too interested in the property?" The direct question caught her off guard. Her father was more observant than she had given him credit for, and his protective instincts were clearly engaged. She wanted desperately to tell him everything, about the hidden room, about Martha's warnings, about the men with metal detectors. But Martha's careful instructions echoed in her mind. Trust carefully. Reveal gradually. Protect the secret until you're certain of safety. Just the regular people, Dad? Sometimes hikers pass by on the trail, but they don't usually stop. Tom nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with her answer. "Well, you keep Max with you whenever you go out there. And if anyone approaches you or makes you feel uncomfortable, you come straight home and tell me about it. Understood?" Understood. That evening, after her parents had gone to bed, Lily sat in her room studying Martha's surveyor's notebook by flashlight. The precision of the measurements fascinated her, and she began to understand how her great-aunt had managed to protect the treasure for so many years. By knowing exactly where it was located, Martha could monitor any activities that came too close to the actual site. According to the triangulation calculations, the primary treasure cache was located in a section of woods that was barely visible from the cabin. Anyone searching the property casually would likely focus on areas closer to the buildings, never suspecting that the real prize lay hidden in what appeared to be undisturbed forest. But Martha's notes also revealed something troubling. The land. Developers weren't just interested in the treasure. They had apparently done research into the property's mineral rights and had discovered something that made the entire 80 acres valuable, not just the specific sites where Samuel Matthews had hidden his legacy. Phase 2. Protection protocols, Lily whispered to herself, remembering Martha's emergency instructions. It was time to reach out to the trusted contacts her great-aunt had identified. The situation was escalating beyond what an 8-year-old girl could handle alone, no matter how determined she might be. Max lifted his head from where he was lying beside her desk, as if he had heard something in her voice that indicated a decision had been made. His brown eyes reflected the flashlight beam, and in them Lily saw the same intelligence and loyalty that had made him Martha's perfect partner in protecting the family secret. Tomorrow, she would call Mayor Henderson and begin the process of building the team Martha had envisioned. Tonight, she would study the surveyor's measurements and prepare herself for whatever challenges lay ahead. The damaged lockbox fragment lay in Lily's hands, like a piece of a puzzle that had been scattered by time and weather. She had found it during her morning exploration of the area where the treasure hunters had been probing the soil, partially buried beneath a fallen log that had clearly been moved recently. The metal was corroded and bent, but she could still make out parts of what had once been an elaborate locking mechanism. Max had led her to the discovery, his nose following a scent trail that was invisible to her, but obviously significant too. His trained senses, the way he approached the fragment, carefully, almost reverently, suggested he had encountered similar artifacts before during his years with Martha. "This used to hold something important, didn't it, boy?" Lily asked, turning the broken metal piece in the morning sunlight. Something that those men were looking for. The lockbox fragment answered several questions that had been troubling her since she began studying Martha's records. Her great-aunt's notes frequently referenced scattered documentation and incomplete evidence sets, suggesting that the complete treasure archive had been divided among multiple hiding places for security. Finding this damaged container explained why some of Martha's maps seemed to have gaps, why certain crucial details were missing from her carefully maintained records. Someone had found one of the document caches before Martha could retrieve it. The implications were sobering. If the treasure hunters had accessed part of the original documentation left by Samuel Matthews, they might know more about the treasure's location than Lily had realized. They weren't just searching blindly, they were working with information that could make their efforts dangerously effective. Back in the hidden room beneath the cabin, Lily spread out all of Martha's maps and compared them to the notes she had been keeping about recent activity on the property. A disturbing pattern emerged. The areas where she had observed the most severe activity corresponded closely to locations where Martha had found evidence of previous excavation attempts. "They've been at this for years," she realized aloud, tracing the pattern with her finger. "Look, Max, every place Martha marked as previously disturbed matches up with where we've seen fresh activity. They've been searching systematically, probably ever since they got their hands on whatever was in this lockbox." A manila folder, tucked behind Martha's desk, contained photographs that supported this theory. The pictures, taken with a telephoto lens from concealed positions, showed the same men who had been on the property recently. But these photos were dated over 2 years ago, proving that Martha had been documenting their activities for much longer than her journal entries suggested. One photograph particularly caught Lily's attention. It showed a heavy-set man in expensive outdoor gear pointing to a handheld device, while his companion consulted what was clearly a very old map. The map looked remarkably similar to some of the documents in Martha's collection, suggesting that the treasure hunters possessed copies of original materials from Samuel Matthews's archive. A handwritten note on the back of the photograph, in Martha's careful script, provided additional context. Leader appears to be Raymond Hutchins, grandson of James Hutchins, who worked for grandfather in the 1920s. Family connection explains access to documentation. Extremely dangerous, knows almost as much as we do. The revelation hit Lily like a physical blow. The treasure hunters weren't strangers who had stumbled onto the secret through luck or persistence. They were family, descendants of someone who had worked closely with Samuel Matthews during the original hiding of the treasure. Their search wasn't just motivated by greed. It was driven by what they probably considered their legitimate inheritance rights. "That's why they're so confident," Lily whispered to Max, who was lying beside her chair in his usual protective position. "They think they have just as much right to the treasure as we do." Martha's notes about Raymond Hutchins painted a picture of a man who had spent decades researching his family's connection to the Matthews treasure. His grandfather, James, had been Samuel Matthews's trusted foreman, involved in the construction of the underground storage facilities and privy to many of the secrets that Samuel had kept hidden from the rest of the world. When James died unexpectedly in 1934, he had apparently taken some crucial information with him, information that Raymond had been trying to piece together ever since. The folder contained copies of legal documents showing that Raymond had attempted several times over the years to claim partial ownership of the Matthews property based on his grandfather's work contracts. Each attempt had been successfully blocked by Martha's careful legal preparations, but the documents revealed a man with both the resources and the determination to pursue a very long-term strategy. "No wonder Martha was so worried," Lily said, studying a court filing from 5 years earlier. "This isn't just about some greedy treasure hunters. This is about a family feud that's been going on for almost a century." The most recent documents in the folder were the most alarming. Raymond Hutchins had apparently hired a team of professional researchers who had been studying property records, family genealogies, and historical archives throughout the region. Their work had led them to discoveries that Martha found deeply troubling, including evidence that other Matthews family properties might contain additional treasure sites. A memo dated just 6 weeks before Martha's death contained her most dire assessment of the situation. "R. Hutchins has expanded his search beyond our property. His researchers have identified 3 other locations with potential Matthews family connections. If he gains access to any of those sites, he may find documentation that reveals the master plan grandfather never intended to share. The primary. A cache may be just the beginning. I fear we are dealing with something much larger than I ever imagined." The weight of responsibility that had been growing heavier with each discovery now felt almost unbearable. Martha hadn't just been protecting a single treasure. She had been guarding what appeared to be an entire network of hidden wealth and historical artifacts. Samuel Matthews had apparently been far more than a successful local businessman. He had been involved in something significant enough to require multiple secured sites and complex legal protections that were still effective nearly a century later. As Lily sat in Martha's chair, surrounded by evidence of a conflict that predated her birth by decades, she began to understand why her great-aunt had lived such a solitary, vigilant life. The treasure wasn't just valuable. It was the center of a struggle between families, a legacy that had shaped generations of careful guardianship and determined pursuit. Max seemed to sense her growing anxiety. He left his usual spot and came to press against her legs, offering his solid warmth as comfort. The gesture reminded her that she wasn't facing this challenge entirely alone. Martha had prepared for this moment, training Max not just as a companion, but as a partner in protecting what Samuel Matthews had hidden. But even with Max's help, even with Martha's careful preparation, Lily knew she was approaching the limits of what an 8-year-old could handle independently. The Hutchins family had resources, experience, and legal knowledge that far exceeded anything she could bring to the conflict. If she was going to protect Martha's legacy, she needed to start building the support network her great-aunt had envisioned. Tomorrow, she would make the phone call that would change everything. Martha's final letter was sealed with red wax, pressed with a signet ring that bore the same symbols Lily had seen etched into the mysterious key. The envelope had been hidden in a secret compartment within Martha's desk, revealed only when Lily accidentally triggered a hidden spring while searching for more surveyor's tools. The letter was addressed in Martha's distinctive handwriting, for Lily Matthews, to be opened when the burden becomes too heavy to bear alone. With trembling fingers, Lily broke the wax seal and unfolded the pages inside. Max sat beside her, chair unusually still, as if he too understood the significance of this moment. "My dearest Lily," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then you have discovered far more than I ever intended to burden you with, and the situation has become more dangerous than an 8-year-old child should have to face alone. I pray you will forgive an old woman for placing such responsibility on your young shoulders, but you were the only one I trusted with the heart to understand what our family has protected for so many generations." The letter's formal tone gradually gave way to Martha's more familiar, conversational voice, as she revealed truths that transformed everything Lily thought she knew about her inheritance. "What I must tell you now will seem impossible, but every word is true. Your great-great-grandfather Samuel Matthews was not simply a successful businessman who struck it rich and decided to hide his wealth. He was the guardian of something far more significant, a collection of artifacts and documents that could rewrite the history of our entire region. Lily's hands tightened on the letter as she read Martha's explanation of Samuel's true identity. He had been a secret agent for the federal government during the early 1920s, tasked with protecting historical artifacts and documents that powerful interests wanted to acquire or destroy. When his cover was compromised and his life threatened, he'd been forced to disappear, taking with him a treasure trove of irreplaceable historical materials. The money, and yes, there is indeed a great deal of money, was never the most important part of Samuel's legacy. The $200 million represents not just hidden wealth, but the value of artifacts that belong in museums, documents that could change our understanding of early American history, and evidence of events that certain powerful families have spent decades trying to keep hidden. Martha's letter revealed that the underground preservation chambers weren't just hiding places for treasure. They were carefully controlled archives designed to protect materials that would otherwise have been lost or destroyed. Samuel had been fighting a war that most people never knew existed, a conflict between those who wanted to preserve history and those who preferred to control it. The Hutchins family's claim to our property isn't based on simple greed, my dear. Raymond Hutchins believes his grandfather was murdered to prevent him from revealing what he knew about Samuel's true mission. In his mind, he's not just seeking treasure, he's pursuing justice for a wrong committed against his family nearly a century ago. The revelation reframed everything Lily had learned about the conflict. Raymond Hutchins wasn't just a greedy treasure hunter, he was a man driven by a family legacy of grievance and suspicion. His grandfather, James Hutchins, had indeed worked closely with Samuel Matthews, but as an unwitting accomplice rather than a trusted partner. When James began asking too many questions about the strange construction projects and unusual security measures, Samuel had been forced to make a terrible choice. Samuel didn't murder James Hutchins, Martha's letter continued, but he did arrange for him to be relocated to another state with a new identity, separating him permanently from his family and friends in Pine Ridge. In those days, such actions were sometimes necessary to protect national secrets. James was given money and documents for a new life, but he was never allowed to return or contact his family. They were told he had died in an industrial accident. The truth was more complex and heartbreaking than simple murder or betrayal. James Hutchins had lived another 40 years under his new identity, occasionally sending anonymous money to his family, but never revealing that he was alive. His sons grew up believing their father had been killed, and they passed that belief to their children. Raymond Hutchins had spent his entire adult life seeking justice for a crime that had never actually occurred. But here is the most important truth of all, Lily, Martha's letter revealed, and the reason I chose you as my successor, despite your young age. Samuel Matthews left specific instructions about what should happen to his legacy when the time was right. He never intended for it to remain hidden forever. He wanted the historical materials returned to the appropriate institutions, the artifacts donated to museums, and the money used to support historical preservation efforts. Martha's final revelation transformed Lily's understanding of her role completely. She wasn't just supposed to guard the treasure, she was meant to decide when and how to reveal it. Samuel's careful preservation work had been preparation for an eventual disclosure that would benefit everyone, not just the Matthews family. I could never bring myself to take this final step, Martha admitted in her letter. The responsibility felt too great, the potential consequences too uncertain. But you, my dear child, have something I lost long ago, the courage to believe that people are fundamentally good, that truth is better than secrecy, and that preservation is more important than possession. The letter included detailed instructions for what Martha called the Great Revelation, a plan for safely disclosing the treasure's existence in a way that would honor Samuel's intentions while protecting the artifacts from those who might exploit them. The plan involved multiple trusted parties, including several historians, museum curators, and government officials who had been secretly briefed about the Matthews legacy over the years. Raymond Hutchins is not our enemy, Lily. He is a man who has been hurt by secrets and lies, just as our family has been burdened by the responsibility of keeping them. The solution is not to fight him, but to invite him to be part of the revelation. His grandfather's story deserves to be told truthfully, and his family's pain deserves to be acknowledged. Martha's letter concluded with specific instructions for contacting the network of trusted individuals who had been waiting for decades for the signal to begin the revelation process. The list included names Lily recognized from Pine Ridge's city government, as well as several people she had never heard of who held positions at universities and museums across the country. "Max knows more than you might realize," the letter's final paragraph revealed. "He has been trained not just to protect you, but to guide you to specific locations when the time comes. He carries in his memory the knowledge of every hiding place, every secret passage, and every security measure Samuel put in place. When you are ready to begin the revelation, simply tell him, 'Show me grandfather's legacy,' and he will understand." As Lily finished reading, she looked down at Max with new appreciation for his intelligence and training. The golden retriever had been more than Martha's companion. He had been her partner in a mission that spanned generations. The weight of decision settled on her shoulders differently now. She wasn't just protecting a secret. She was determining the future of a historical treasure that belonged to more than just her family. The choice she made would affect not only her own life, but the lives of Raymond Hutchins and his family, the historical record of her entire region, and the legacy of a man who had sacrificed everything to preserve what others would have destroyed. Martha had chosen her not because she was the last living Matthews descendant, but because she believed an 8-year-old girl might have the wisdom and courage that adults had lost. The question now was whether Lily could live up to that extraordinary faith. "What do you think, Max?" she asked softly, stroking the dog's golden fur. "Are we ready to change everything?" Max looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes and wagged his tail once, a gesture that somehow conveyed both encouragement and complete trust in whatever decision she might make. The master map spread across Martha's desk like a blueprint for changing history. Lily had spent 3 days assembling it from fragments found throughout the hidden room. Pieces of Samuel's original documentation combined with Martha's decades of careful updates and observations. When complete, it revealed not just the location of the primary treasure cache, but the intricate network of preservation sites that connected the Matthews property to locations throughout the region. Max lay beside her chair, more alert than she had ever seen him. Ever since she had spoken the phrase Martha had taught her, "Show me grandfather's legacy," the dog's behavior had changed dramatically. He seemed to understand that the long period of waiting and watching was coming to an end. "Look at this, boy," Lily said, pointing to the map's central feature. "Grandfather didn't just hide one treasure. He created an entire underground museum, spread across 7 different sites, all connected by a system of tunnels that most people never knew existed." The scope of Samuel Matthews' preservation effort was staggering. According to the master map, the primary cache beneath Martha's property contained not only monetary treasure, but also the central archive of documents that would prove the historical significance of everything else. The other 6 sites, scattered across 3 counties, held specialized collections, Native American artifacts, Civil War documents, geological samples, and what Martha's notes cryptically described as evidence of governmental irregularities requiring long-term preservation. But it was the timeline notation at the bottom of the map that made Lily's hands shake as she read it. Samuel had planned for the great revelation to occur exactly 100 years after the initial preservation began. According to his carefully calculated schedule, that date was less than 6 months away. He knew, she whispered to Max. Somehow he knew exactly when it would be safe to reveal everything. We're not just supposed to protect the secret, we're supposed to end it. The realization added urgent pressure to decisions that had already felt overwhelming. Samuel's centennial timeline meant that Lily couldn't simply wait until she was older and more experienced to handle the responsibility. The revelation was meant to happen now, with her as the catalyst, regardless of her age or readiness. Martha's instructions for implementing the great revelation were detailed but complex. The process required coordination between multiple parties, careful timing to ensure media attention without sensationalism, and most importantly, the cooperation of Raymond Hutchins and his family. The plan would only work if it brought healing. Rather than perpetuating the cycle of secrets and suspicion, Phase 3, Implementation Protocols, Lily read aloud from Martha's carefully typed instructions. Step 1. Establish contact with Raymond Hutchins through neutral intermediary. Step 2. Arrange meeting on neutral ground with Historical Oversight Committee present. Step 3. Provide limited access to preliminary documentation to establish good faith. Step 4. Coordinate simultaneous revelation at all 7 sites with appropriate authorities and media presence. The neutral intermediary Martha had identified was Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a historian at the State University who had been quietly researching the Matthews family legacy for over a decade. According to Martha's notes, Dr. Chen was one of the few people who understood both the historical significance of Samuel's preservation work and the delicate family dynamics that had kept it hidden for so long. Lily had spent 2 hours on the phone with Dr. Chen the previous evening, struggling to convince a professional historian that an 8-year-old girl was calling about a matter of international historical importance. Only when Lily mentioned specific details from Martha's correspondence, details that Dr. Chen had thought were known only to herself and Martha, did the conversation become serious. "I've been waiting for this call for 15 years, Dr. Chen had said finally. "Martha told me it would come eventually, but I never imagined it would be from someone so young. Are you certain you understand what you're proposing to do?" "I understand that keeping secrets has caused more problems than telling the truth ever could," Lily had replied, surprised by her own certainty. "My great-great-grandfather wanted this story to be told when the time was right. Martha thought I would know when that time came. I think it's now." Dr. Chen had agreed to serve as intermediary with Raymond Hutchins, but she had insisted on meeting Lily in person before proceeding. That meeting was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at the Pine Ridge Public Library, a neutral location where serious conversations could happen without arousing too much community curiosity. Meanwhile, Lily had begun the delicate process of preparing her parents for revelations that would transform their understanding of their family history. She had started with small hints, questions about Samuel Matthews, requests to hear family stories, expressions of interest in local history. Her parents had responded with the limited information they possessed, unaware that their 8-year-old daughter already knew far more about their heritage than they did. "Dad," she had asked over breakfast that morning, "do you think great-aunt Martha was keeping any secrets from us?" Tom had paused in his reading of the morning newspaper, considering the question seriously. "Martha was a private person, that's certain. She always seemed to know more about family history than she let on. Why do you ask?" "I found some old papers in the cabin, maps and things. They look important." "What kind of maps?" "I'm not sure. Maybe you could come look at them with me this weekend." It was a careful opening move, designed to prepare him for larger revelations without overwhelming him immediately. Martha's instructions emphasized the importance of bringing family members into the process gradually, allowing them time to adjust to each new level of understanding. The most challenging preparation involved Max's specialized training. Martha's letter had revealed that the dog possessed knowledge essential to accessing the preservation site safely. He had been taught not only the locations of hidden entrances, but also the security procedures Samuel had put in place to protect the archives from unauthorized access. "Show me the first marker," Lily had commanded that morning, following Martha's instructions for activating Max's training protocols. Without hesitation, Max had led her to a spot near the cabin's foundation where a seemingly ordinary stone was positioned among many others. When Lily examined it closely, she found tiny symbols carved into its surface, symbols that matched those on the mysterious key and the master map. "Each site has 3 markers," she read from Martha's notes. "The first identifies the general area, the second marks the safe approach route, and the third reveals the actual entrance." Max knows the sequence for all 7 sites and has been trained to guide authorized personnel through the access procedures. The complexity of Samuel's security system was both impressive and intimidating. It had clearly been designed by someone with extensive experience in protecting sensitive materials, someone who understood that the greatest treasures often required the most sophisticated safeguards. As the afternoon wore on, Lily found herself moving between excitement and terror with each new revelation. The magnitude of what she was preparing to do, revealing a century-old secret that could change local history, exposing treasures worth hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially healing a family feud that had lasted for generations, seemed impossibly large for someone her age. But Martha's voice echoed in her memory from dozens of afternoon visits. "The biggest adventures, little one, always begin with someone deciding to be braver than they feel." That evening, after her parents had gone to bed, Lily sat in her room, with Max beside her, reviewing the final preparations for tomorrow's meeting with Dr. Chen. The historian had requested specific documentation to verify Lily's claims, and Martha's careful organization made it possible to provide exactly what was needed without revealing too much too quickly. The documents she had selected told the story in carefully measured steps: Samuel's original government credentials, photographs of the preservation chambers, samples of the historical artifacts in storage, and most importantly, James Hutchins's final letter explaining why he had allowed his family to believe he was dead rather than revealing the truth about his work with Samuel. "Tomorrow changes everything, doesn't it, Max?" she asked softly, stroking the dog's golden fur. "Once we start this process, there's no going back to the way things were." Max looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes that had seen so much over the years with Martha. His expression seemed to convey both understanding and encouragement, as if he too was ready for the long period of secrecy to end. Outside her window, the lights of Pine Ridge twinkled in the valley below. Soon, this quiet town would be at the center of a story that reached back through a century of hidden history. Museums would send representatives. Government officials would arrive to verify claims. Media attention would transform the sleepy community into a temporary focal point of national interest. But beneath all the excitement and chaos that was coming, Lily hoped would be something more valuable than treasure or fame. She hoped for understanding, for healing, for the kind of truth-telling that could bridge the gaps between families and generations. As she drifted off to sleep, with Max keeping his faithful watch from beside her bed, Lily's dreams were filled with images of secrets finally spoken, treasures finally shared, and stories finally told to the people who had waited a lifetime to hear them. The treasure vault key felt warm in Lily's palm as she and Max approached the location marked with Samuel's red star on the master map. Dr. Chen walked beside them, her face a mixture of professional excitement and personal awe as she witnessed the culmination of years of academic research becoming tangible reality. According to Martha's measurements, "It should be right here," Lily said, consulting the surveyor's notes one final time. They stood in a small clearing deep in the woods, surrounded by pine trees that had grown tall enough to form a natural cathedral around Samuel's most important hiding place. Max immediately began his practiced routine, moving to a cluster of rocks that looked no different from dozens of others scattered throughout the forest. But when he sat down beside one particular stone and whined softly, Lily knew they had found the first marker. The symbols carved into the stone were barely visible after nearly a century of weather, but they matched the pattern on Samuel's original, mapped perfectly. Following Max's lead, they located the second marker 30 feet away, hidden beneath a fallen log that had clearly been positioned deliberately to conceal it. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Chen whispered, photographing each marker. With the careful attention of someone who understood, they were documenting history. The level of planning and execution required for this kind of preservation project. Samuel Matthews wasn't just hiding treasure, he was creating a time capsule designed to last for generations. The third marker led them to what appeared to be a natural depression in the forest floor, overgrown with decades of accumulated pine needles and forest debris. But when Max began digging in a specific spot, his paws quickly uncovered something that made Dr. Chen gasp audibly. Beneath the organic matter lay a circular metal plate, green with age but still solid, marked with the same symbols they had been following. At its center was a keyhole that perfectly matched the treasure vault key Lily carried. "This is it," she said, her voice barely audible with excitement and nervousness. "This is what Martha and Samuel have been protecting all these years." The key turned smoothly, despite its age, and the metal plate lifted to reveal a narrow shaft descending into the earth. A ladder made of treated wood, still sturdy after decades underground, led down into darkness that seemed to hold the promise of answers to questions that had haunted two families for nearly a century. Dr. Chen had brought professional equipment for precisely this moment, high-powered flashlights, measuring tools, and camera gear that would document whatever they found. But as they descended into Samuel's most secret place, even her academic preparation couldn't diminish the sense of awe that surrounded them. The preservation chamber at the bottom of the shaft was larger than anything Lily had imagined. Samuel had carved a series of connected rooms directly into the bedrock, creating climate-controlled spaces that had kept their contents in remarkable condition. The main chamber contained metal filing cabinets arranged with military precision, each one labeled with dates and categories that told the story of Samuel's preservation mission. But it was the contents of the central display case that took their breath away. Behind glass that had remained perfectly clear for decades, Samuel had arranged a collection of artifacts that represented the true treasure he had died protecting. Native American pottery and tools that predated European settlement, Civil War documents signed by generals whose names appeared in history textbooks, geological samples that provided evidence of mineral deposits worth far more than the monetary treasure Samuel had also hidden. "My God," Dr. Chen breathed, her professional composure finally cracking. Some of these artifacts were thought to be lost forever. Museums around the world have been looking for documentation like this for decades. Max had settled into a corner of the chamber where a small bed and water bowl suggested he had visited this place many times with Martha. His calm acceptance of their presence indicated that this revelation was proceeding exactly as it had been planned to unfold. In the center of the chamber, positioned like an altar in this underground temple to preservation, stood a simple wooden desk. On its surface lay a single envelope, sealed with the same red wax and signet ring that had marked Martha's final letter. But this envelope was addressed in Samuel's distinctive handwriting, "For the Matthews descendant who chooses truth." Over secrecy. As Lily broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside, she realized she was reading words that had been waiting for her specifically. Written by a man who had somehow known that someday an 8-year-old girl would stand in this chamber and make the choice that would define the future of his legacy. "If you are reading this," Samuel's letter began, "then the time has come to complete the mission I began so many years ago. The preservation is finished. The revelation must now begin." But even as triumph filled her heart at having successfully reached the treasure's heart, Lily heard something that made her blood run cold, the sound of vehicles approaching through the forest above, and voices that she recognized as belonging to Raymond Hutchins and his team. The treasure hunters had found them. The heritage certificate emerged from Samuel's desk drawer like a key to resolving a century of conflict. As footsteps echoed down the shaft above them, Lily's hands moved with surprising calm through the documents Samuel had arranged for exactly this moment. The certificate, signed by federal officials and notarized with government seals, established beyond any legal doubt that the Matthews family held legitimate guardianship over the preservation sites. "Dr. Chen," Lily said quietly, "I think we're about to meet Raymond Hutchins. Martha said he wasn't our enemy, just someone who needed to learn the truth." The historian nodded, her academic training taking over as she quickly secured the most fragile artifacts while ensuring that the important documents remained visible and accessible. If Martha was right about his character, this could be the healing opportunity your family has needed for generations. Raymond Hutchins appeared at the bottom of the shaft like a man stepping into a dream he had pursued his entire adult life. He was older than Lily had expected, probably in his 70s, with grey hair and weathered hands that spoke of decades spent digging and searching. Behind him came two younger men, his sons, she realized, carrying the same determined expression that had driven their family's quest. But instead of the anger or aggression Lily had feared, Raymond's face showed something closer to wonder as he took in the scope of Samuel's preservation chamber. His eyes moved from the filing cabinets to the display cases to the heritage certificate lying open on the desk. And gradually his expression shifted from suspicion to understanding. "My God," he whispered, approaching the central display with reverence. "It's all true. Everything Grandfather wrote in his final letter, it was all true." "Mr. Hutchins," Dr. Chen said gently, stepping forward in her role as neutral intermediary, "I believe you and Lily have quite a lot to discuss. Your families have been protecting and seeking the same thing for almost a century." Lily found her voice, remembering Martha's instructions about the importance of truth and reconciliation. "Your grandfather James didn't die the way your family was told. Samuel didn't have him killed. I have his letters explaining what really happened." She reached into her backpack and withdrew the documents Martha had prepared for this moment. James Hutchins's own words, written in the months before his death under his assumed identity, explaining why he had chosen exile over betraying Samuel's mission. Raymond took the letters with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the familiar handwriting he remembered from childhood. As he read, years of anger and suspicion began dissolving into something more complex. Grief for time lost, but also understanding of sacrifices made for purposes larger than any one family's pain. He wrote that Samuel gave him a choice. "Raymond," said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "disappear and live safely under a new name, or stay and risk being killed by the people who were hunting Samuel. He chose to protect the mission, even if it meant our family would think he was dead." "There's more," Lily said gently, pulling out the final revelation Martha had prepared. "Your grandfather left something for your family too. He made Samuel promise that when the truth finally came out, the Hutchins family would be recognized as partners in the preservation effort, not just workers who were betrayed." The partnership agreement, signed by both Samuel Matthews and James Hutchins before the latter's disappearance, established the Hutchins family as co-guardians of the preservation sites. James had earned that recognition through his loyalty and sacrifice, and Samuel had honored it by setting aside a significant portion of the monetary treasure specifically for James's descendants. $25 million. Raymond read from the agreement, his voice barely audible. He left us $25 million and recognition as equal partners in preserving what we helped him hide. Max had been watching the emotional reunion with obvious approval, and now he moved to Raymond's side, offering the same gentle comfort he had always provided to Martha. The old man knelt down to scratch behind the dog's ears, and for a moment the decades of conflict seemed to disappear entirely. I spent 70 years hating a man who was trying to protect my grandfather, Raymond said, looking up at Lily with tears in his eyes. And you, an 8-year-old child, have done what none of us adults could manage. You've brought our families back together. Dr. Chen had been documenting the entire conversation, recognizing its historical significance. This is exactly what Samuel and Martha hoped would happen, she said. The great revelation was never just about exposing the treasure. It was about healing the wounds that keeping the secret had created. Working together, the 3 generations represented in the chamber began the process of cataloging Samuel's preservation work. Raymond's expertise with historical artifacts complemented Dr. Chen's academic knowledge, and Lily's intimate familiarity with Martha's documentation system. What had been planned as a confrontation became a collaboration that honored the vision. Both Samuel and James had shared nearly a century earlier. As they worked, Max maintained his protective watch, but his posture had relaxed completely. The golden retriever seemed to understand that his long mission of guarding the family secret was finally complete. The treasure was safe, the families were reunited, and the truth Martha had carried for so many years was finally free to serve the purposes Samuel had always intended. 6 months after the great revelation, Martha's rocking chair sat in its familiar spot by the cabin window, but now it overlooked a scene that would have filled the old woman's heart with joy. The formerly crumbling structure had been carefully restored as both a family home and the visitor center for what had become known as the Matthews-Hutchins Historical Preservation Site. Lily sat in the chair each morning before school, reading from the books Martha had loved, with Max stretched out contentedly at her feet. The transformation had been remarkable in its scope and speed. Once Dr. Chen had presented the authenticated documentation to the appropriate authorities, the preservation sites had been designated as protected historical landmarks. Museums from around the country had sent representatives to catalogue and study Samuel's collection. But everything remained on the original sites, exactly as he had intended. The monetary treasure had been divided according to Samuel's careful instructions. $25 million had indeed been set aside for the Hutchins family, finally providing Raymond with the recognition his grandfather had earned through loyalty and sacrifice. Another portion had been designated for historical preservation. Efforts throughout the region, funding education programs and research initiatives that would ensure future generations understood the importance of protecting their heritage. Lily's family had received enough to secure their financial future, without overwhelming their values. Tom Matthews no longer needed to drive trucks across 3 states to make ends meet, and Sarah had been able to reduce her hours at the general store to spend more time with her daughter. But they had chosen to remain in Pine Ridge, in the house, where Lily had grown up, because some treasures couldn't be improved by money. The most valuable outcome of the revelation had been the healing between families that had been estranged for nearly a century. Raymond Hutchins had become a regular visitor to the cabin, sharing stories about his grandfather with Lily and helping her understand the historical context of Samuel's preservation work. His sons had proven to be skilled historians in their own right, and together the Matthews and Hutchins families had formed a foundation dedicated to continuing Samuel's mission. "Good morning, beautiful girl," Lily said to the photograph of Martha that now sat on the mantel, restored to a place of honor among the family pictures. "Max and I are going to visit the education center today. We're giving a tour to some students from the state university." The education center, built on the site where Raymond had first conducted his metal detector searches, had become a model for how historical preservation could serve contemporary communities. School groups visited regularly to learn about local history, and researchers from around the world came to study Samuel's innovative preservation techniques. Max had adjusted to his new role as both family pet and historical ambassador with characteristic grace. He still knew the location of every secret entrance and security measure, but now his knowledge was used to provide safe access for legitimate researchers rather than to guard against treasure hunters. Children who visited the site were inevitably drawn to the gentle golden retriever, who seemed to understand the significance of everything around him. The morning's tour group was particularly special. Graduate students in museum studies who were researching community-based preservation models. Lily had become surprisingly comfortable in her role as the young face of the Preservation Foundation, speaking to groups about the importance of protecting history for future generations. "The most important thing my great-aunt Martha taught me," she told the students as they gathered in the cabin's main room, "is that the best treasures are the ones you share with other people. Money is nice, but stories and knowledge and understanding, those are the things that make people's lives richer." After the tour, Lily and Max walked the familiar path to the primary preservation site, now marked with tasteful signs that explained its historical significance without detracting from the natural beauty of the forest setting. The underground chambers had been equipped with proper lighting and climate control, transforming them from secret hiding places into functional research facilities. Raymond was waiting for them at the site, as he did most afternoons, ready to share another piece of family history that helped complete the picture of what Samuel and James had accomplished together. At 73, he had found new purpose in education and preservation, channeling the determination that had once driven his treasure hunting into efforts that honored both men's legacy. "I brought something to show you today," he said, pulling a worn leather journal from his jacket pocket. "It's one of Grandfather's personal diaries from the months right before he disappeared. I thought you might like to read his own words about working with Samuel." As they sat together in the restored chamber, surrounded by artifacts that had been hidden for decades and were now helping scholars understand their region's past, Lily reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that first day when Max had dug up the rusty key. She was still 8 years old, still attended Pine Ridge Elementary School, still helped her mother with household chores, and played with the friends she had always known. But she was also the youngest member of a historical preservation foundation, the co-guardian of a treasure that had transformed her community's understanding of its own heritage, and the bridge between families whose conflict had finally found resolution in truth and shared purpose. "Do you think Martha would be proud of what we've accomplished?" she asked Max as they prepared to head home for dinner. The golden retriever looked up at her with those intelligent brown eyes that had seen so much history unfold, wagged his tail once, and led the way back toward the cabin where Martha's rocking chair waited by the window, ready for another evening of reading and remembering and planning for the adventures that tomorrow would surely bring. In the distance, the lights of Pine Ridge twinkled in the valley below, but now they illuminated a town that knew its own story, treasured its own heritage, and looked toward a future built on the solid foundation of truth finally told and secrets finally shared.